Let me introduce our guests. Today we have Oscar de los Santos and Nancy Gutierrez, both representing the Democratic Party in the House. Oscar, you're from the Phoenix area. Nancy's from the Tucson area. Oscar de los Santos and Nancy were both elected to the House in 2022, and so they're both relatively new members. Oscar is a graduate of University of Oxford and a master's in public policy and a Rhodes Scholar. He served in 2012 on President Obama's staff of economic advisors in the White House. And recently he was president of the Association of Arizona Food Banks, where he was a legislative affairs coordinator. I think that's a fair title. Nancy is a school teacher, public school teacher. She's been certified since 1994. She's a military spouse and a mother of two. And she joined the legislature out of her passion for public education. So welcome to both of you. Oscar de los Santos is the assistant minority leader of our caucus, and Nancy is our esteemed whip. So welcome to both of you. Is there anything that I've skipped over that you want to highlight about your biographies?
Just that Oscar's a Rhodes Scholar and I'm not.
That's very kind. Thank you.
All right. So, Oscar, you're serving on the NRU on appropriations and on rules this session. So, obviously, we're going to have a little bit of a focus on some of the assignments that you guys are undertaking as committee members as well as leadership. Nancy's serving in education, regulatory affairs, government appropriations, and
just appropriations and education.
Oh, okay. So I overstated a little bit. So education and
appropriations. Although so far I've also been on health and government because I've been filling in for other members.
Okay. So I thought that was a really heavy lift based on your
yes.
assignment. The 5 committee assignments seems like a bit much for anybody.
You know, I do what I can.
But you're both on appropriations.
You do a lot.
It was a really
we are.
So I'd like to talk first of all about the party caucuses in private to discuss matters of strategy going forward into the legislative session. What is it you can share with us in regards to our party caucuses strategy for this coming session?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. I can kick us off here, and the truth is that the planning for the session started many, many months ago. Over the summer, myself, Whip Gutierrez, Leader Contreras, and then folks on the Senate side, on the Democratic Senate side, we've been putting our heads together for months to come up with a joint agenda. So these are the sort of 20 to 25 Democratic priorities that we would pass if we're in the majority, and we're so close to being there. But it's supposed to be a document that not just says what we would pass, it's supposed to be a document that convinces the voters to give us the majority. So, we can go into detail a little bit more about it, but it really centers around the things that voters are passionate about right now, which is lowering costs, investing in education, investing in public schools, reining in ESAs, protecting access to reproductive freedom and abortion, and then a whole host of measures that protect our water and our civil rights, our voting rights, from the far-right extremist MAGA attacks that we're seeing here in Arizona, but truly across the country. So those are the things that we're focusing on. We are, trying to barnstorm our districts and the state, whether it's in person or virtually, to get the message out to voters and say, hey, these are the common sense things that you want, then that Democrats will enact when we're in the majority.
Nancy, do you have anything to add to that?
That was perfect. We really did want to do a lot of pre-planning so that we would be ready not only to tell the folks of Arizona what our democratic values are, but also be ready to lead. And I really think we are. And with each week, we are more together as a caucus. We are focused on strategy. You know, we're talking to ranking members about strategy going into committee, going on the floor. And so it's a really exciting time because I think we are definitely ready to lead.
Excellent. Yes, I'm hoping that it'll definitely be a breakthrough. And I'd like to get specifically into the deliverables that Democrats are offering voters should they entrust us with the majority next year. But obviously, you know, we're still in the minority now. So a lot of what we're doing is blocking and tackling the worst of the worst that's coming forward. And based on the bills that have come into the hopper thus far, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's somewhere around 600 or 700 at this point. What are the worst ideas of the Republicans that we're going to have to be fighting against this session, in your view? Nancy, you want to lead us off? Especially,
Sure.
I guess, around education, which is going to be your specialty.
There are definitely education bills. I expect to see some really dangerous gun laws having to do with schools, like the ones we've seen in the past, like having loaded weapons on school campuses would be legal. Yep. Training teachers to be, you know, snipers in addition to their teaching duties, making it so that kids 6th through 12th grade would have like weapon training at school. I mean, these are all that we didn't have passed last year because of Katie Hobbs, our governor. So I expect those to come up. Unfortunately, I expect some of our anti-trans bills to come back. I expect, you know, I think the pronoun bill was already introduced again in the Senate. So that's what we're expecting in education.
So it's fair to say that we're going to see a lot of these more messaging bills to the Republican base.
100%. Yes.
And, you know, force our governor, of course, to veto these things. In terms of like actually the funding structure of our educational system, can you talk about what some of the ideas that Republicans have recently implemented are doing to the financing of our educational system right now?
Sure. I mean, the ESA vouchers are a giveaway for private schools, and they are over budget right now by over $100 million. And we expect them to be close to $1 billion drain on our budget by next year's fiscal budget. And these are literally scholarships for kids who have always been in public schools. And that's what they're going for. And these scholarships come with absolutely no transparency, nor do they come with any requirement to prove that kids are being educated. You know, public schools have to take standardized tests, which I'm not the greatest fan of, but we do. And we have, you know, requirements on reporting and curriculum and everything that we do in a public school. And these ESA vouchers for the wealthy have none of that. And so the Republicans keep saying that it's a non-starter to do anything to change the ESA voucher program. And, you know, luckily our governor has been working with the Democratic caucus to make sure that we're introducing bills that absolutely tackle especially the safety measures and the transparency of the ESA vouchers, because they are going to bankrupt our state. And Republicans keep wanting to say that students are leaving public schools in droves. They're just fleeing. And the truth is that over the last year, only about 1,000 kids left the public school. And some of those, I'm sure, were just their parents moved. But as of yet, we're over 70,000 ESA vouchers. So that, I mean, the proof is in the pudding, right? The numbers don't lie. If only 1,000 left public school, then where are these kids coming from if there are 70,000 children getting these vouchers? And vouchers can range from $7 to, you know, in the tens of thousands of dollars based on each student. It's irresponsible at the very least.
I didn't realize that it was a variable amount. I thought there was a fixed amount per
No, it's a variable amount because when vouchers first started, they were started for our special education population. And if kids are on the autism spectrum or if they need special devices, that does cost more money. And so they are able to get more. However, those students had to be in public school first for at least 100 days and be evaluated by the school. And now the students that are, claiming some of these health or special education needs are able to go to their doctor and get a note saying, oh, my child needs this. So
I see.
it's a much looser system to get literally tens of thousands, up to $40,000 per child.
I see. So they don't have to be evaluated by any state agency at all in order to qualify for these additional funds. They can just
Correct. And the kids who are really losing in this are the kids who this program was created for, because they are having to wait on their funds to pay their tutors and what they've always qualified for. Now they're at the back of the line when some kids are getting baby grand pianos for their home.
Wow. That's
It's a travesty.
Aware of the full extent of the unregulated nature of those special medical needs and special educational needs.
Yeah, they are the kids who need it the most, and unfortunately, they are the kids who are losing in this situation.
Yeah, and to be clear, I don't think the Democratic Party as a caucus has ever indicated any opposition whatsoever to vouchers for special needs children.
No, that will not be changed. We are only interested in policing. Well, we didn't. The Democrats didn't vote for the universal part of the ESAs in the first place, which was started by former Governor Doug Ducey a couple years ago, and Speaker Toma. That was his idea also. We are just adamantly opposed to the universal voucher.
Yeah. Representative De Los Santos, can you give us any additional perspective on the effect that these universal vouchers are having on our financial situation?
Well, they're blowing up our budget. I mean, it's that clear. We are barreling toward a deficit that we haven't seen in decades at this time, and it's threatening. I mean, the Republicans are threatening cuts to vital services, to our access program that provides life-saving medical care for thousands of Arizonans across the state. I mean, Access is the state's largest insurer, and it insures our most vulnerable populations, and they're going to want to take that off the chopping block, or put that on the chopping block in order to save this giveaway for private schools and wealthy parents. And I think it's completely wrong. So it's taking us completely in the hole. It's fiscally irresponsible. And what I've said over and over again is that this ESA debacle has shown conclusively that the Republicans are not fiscally responsible. They are not fiscally conservative, and never again can any Republican say that they know how to budget, because they have blown this budget up, and they have turned what was a $2 billion surplus last year into a massive deficit. And the deficit is so big, and the ESA program is so out of control, that economists actually don't even know exactly how big our deficit is. So it's been a complete and total disaster, to say the least. I did also want to make a point. You had asked about some of the extremist bills that we had seen, and Whip Gutierrez, you pointed to many of the sort of ludicrous, to put it that way, education bills. But there are a whole host of other areas where our friends on the other side are proposing some extreme stuff. And one of the areas that I want to highlight is on democracy and voting rights, and two bills in particular. You have one bill that was filed to remove President Biden from the ballot in 2024. I mean, this is complete and total nonsense. And it's laughable, but it is also a new front in the war on our democracy and the attacks on the people's right to choose their president. We have never seen something like that before.
The legislature doesn't get to say who's on the presidential preference election, does it?
Well, let me do you one better, because a state senator introduced a bill that would allow the state legislature to override the will of the voters. It says, yeah, voters, you can go to the ballot box, but the state legislature can ignore your choice, and the state lawmakers are going to choose who Arizona's presidential electors vote for president. I mean,
that would be Anthony Kern, who's currently running for Congress.
Well, let's be clear. He is completely unpopular. He is polling at 3%. He's a complete and total loser and an insurrectionist. And so his ideas are going nowhere, either at the state house, and I'm confident he's not going to win his race for Congress. So I just want to put that out there. But that would be Anthony Kern. But the other thing too is that it's not just Anthony Kern, it's the entire Freedom Caucus. And the truth is they're taking over the Republican Party. This is the new Republican Party. It's a party of insurrectionists and extremists who are anti-democracy. They're trying to rip away our freedoms, whether it's voting or access to reproductive freedom. They're just gone completely the way of proto-fascism and authoritarianism. And what we're saying is Democrats are the adults in the room trying to find common sense solutions to the things that actually matter. Schools, water, a balanced budget, right? Those are the things that's the contrast we're trying to draw.
Yeah. Well, every time we talk about
reproductive rights as well. And so that's what we expect to see, some of those sneakier bills as well, like the personhood bills that we saw last session. We expect to see those again, and more like them that just sneak our rights away from us. They're also
more tax on abortion rights and reproductive rights is to be expected this session, I'm assuming. Yeah, well, I certainly hope you keep us updated on all that regarding the small d democracy in Arizona, and also women's rights, because those are areas frequently under attack by this. But every time we talk about a balanced budget and sort of the massive budget deficit that we're looking at, we can't just look at spending. We have to also look at revenue. And I understand that there have been some changes recently in our tax code here in Arizona that have led to declining revenues, especially around income tax. Can you guys talk about that a bit?
Assistant Leader, do you want to take that first?
Sure. So what we saw just a couple of years ago at the state legislature was the Republican majority enacting a plan that most Arizonans disagree with, and that was to give a huge tax giveaway to the wealthiest Arizonans at a time when we actually need to be investing more in our public schools and public services. And so they enacted what is called the flat tax, which in reality, what it does is it lowers taxes for the wealthiest Arizonans and then balances the budget on the backs of the more low-income folks in our state. And that's a problem for two reasons. One, we should not be balancing our budget and running our government off of the backs of hardworking families and middle-class families, while wealthy families get a pass. That's just not the way to do it. But second, every single dollar that is being given away in tax breaks to the wealthiest Arizonans is a dollar that we were taking out of a classroom in the state of Arizona. That is a dollar that is directly coming out of the checks of hardworking teachers and bus drivers and cafeteria workers in the state. So that is the exact wrong budgetary approach, especially at a time when 1 in 3 students in the state of Arizona do not have a certified classroom teacher. And a big reason why we don't have enough certified teachers in the state is because we're one of the states that pays the least to our teachers. And so we cannot raise that pay when we're giving away tax breaks to wealthy Arizonans and corporations. And I think the vast majority of Arizonans agree that when it comes to the choice between funding for public schools and our teachers and bus drivers and cafeteria workers, should we spend on that, or should we spend on giving some rich dude who lives here half the year, who's a snowbird from New York City and probably some hedge fund manager, giving him a tax break, or pay our teachers more? The answer is clear: pay our teachers more. The Republicans disagreed. They're giving money to the wealthy investors.
Correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm going to try and characterize the way this flat tax burdens lower income people, and that's that we used to have a graduated income tax. The higher your income, the rate at which you were taxed slightly went up across tax brackets, so that increment would be taxed at a slightly higher rate. And that's now just out the window. It's a flat tax.
Yep.
In this experiment that they've pursued with the flat tax, did they sunset that at all? Did they put a time limit on it in any way?
Nope. No, they didn't. They
So we're
just
just stuck with
used
that.
the flat tax to, put more money in their pockets and take it, like Assistant Leader said, from the hardest working, most the lower incomes. They did not receive much of a break at all.
Yeah, already in Arizona, we over rely on sales tax. We're amongst the certainly the top quartile of states in terms of our reliance on sales tax, which is obviously the most regressive kind of tax, because the people who make the least spend the largest amount of their income on paying sales tax for necessities that they live with every day. Do we know how much have we had the chance to characterize how much more we rely on sales tax as a result of this flat tax at this point? Because one of the big problems with sales tax is, if your sales go down, then your sales tax revenues plummet. So if you go into a recession, for instance, the state gets in real trouble real quick if they're over reliant on sales tax. So do we have any kind of way of characterizing how much more reliant we are on sales tax?
I think in part because, oh, sorry, go ahead, Whip.
No, go please.
I think in part because the flat tax is so new, those kinds of analyses are still being done. But your point was well taken, and it's exactly right that if you have a recession and you're over reliant on sales tax, obviously sales go down, your revenues go down at the worst time possible. So what they've done is they've structurally made our economy and our state less resilient and more vulnerable to collapsing at a time when it needs to be strong. So yeah, absolutely right.
One of the interesting features in Arizona is that we have a one-way ratchet on our taxes. Once they're cut, they stay cut, because you need a 2/3, I think it's 2/3, maybe 3/4 majority in order to raise a
Yes.
tax rate, as opposed to cut it, which you only need a simple majority. So is there planning in train for how to readjust our tax base should Democrats take the majority, but still just a majority? We don't have a super majority, so we can't really raise taxes. How are we going to deal with that?
Well, in the governor's executive budget, she's dealt with it by just getting a lot more intentional in how we spend and pulling back on some programs that had money in the budget since 2016 and it hadn't been spent. So we're having to be a lot more fiscally conservative and smarter with our budget. I don't, families are having a hard time right now as it is. So I don't see that we as Democrats, as leaders, that will be our first, order of business. It will not be to raise taxes, because we want to do what helps all of our Arizona families. But it is something that we're going to have to look into. And I think we're really going to have to take a look at how corporations are taxed in Arizona, because many corporations in Arizona pay less taxes per year than we do. And that is a problem. We need businesses who will come in to our state and pay their fair share, so that we do have a thriving economy and we do have an adequate workforce. And that just doesn't happen if we, don't have everyone involved in our revenue.
Representative De Los Santos, are there things that are on the table in the future under a democratically controlled state legislature that we can do to enhance our revenue stream, to provide excellent services for the people of Arizona?
That's a terrific question. I think what Gutierrez pointed in the right direction, which is that there is money that needs to be clawed back that is being misspent. We saw hundreds of millions of dollars in the last budget being spent on pork barrel projects that were in Republican districts that kindly were pork for their district, but didn't have a statewide benefit. And so in the next year, we're going to be clawing those back. Obviously, there are legal and constitutional challenges to raising taxes in the state of Arizona, as Whip said, that's probably not on the table. But we can get creative to bring in more money to our critical services and our public schools. And one of those examples I can give you is the Democratic Prop 123 plan. And so this is a terrific example of investing hundreds of millions of dollars in teacher pay increases for education support staff, and increasing funding for school safety measures without raising taxes. So that is the Prop 123 plan that was just unveiled earlier this week and introduced in the House by Representative Judy Schreiber, in the Senate by Senator Christine Marsh, part of the teacher caucus, of which Whip Gutierrez is also a part. And again, that plan does not increase taxes, but it does get new money for our public schools by relying more on our state land trust fund, which is overperformed in the past decade. And so it's left us with a good chunk of change that we should be investing into our students. And the way the Prop 123 plan, the Democratic Prop 123 plan is structured, is it strikes a good balance of taking out just enough to invest in our schools, while also keeping the corpus of this trust strong. And if you look at the plan, at the end of 10 years, when the plan is implemented by 2035, the state land trust grows by $1 billion. So the corpus of the fund is strong, our teachers get paid more, and it's a win-win.
Now,
And not only our teachers, I just want to emphasize that it's the Republicans' plan is not raising that rate at all and only giving some teachers a raise. The Democratic plan that has been worked out with our governor as well is all teachers, all support staff, bus drivers, aides, some of the people that make the very, very least in our school systems, they also get bumped. And I will tell you that as a teacher, my teacher colleagues and I don't want a raise if it's only for us. We need a raise, but so does everyone in the school system. And you don't have a school system without those vital employees. And that is a huge difference in the plans.
Let's look back just a bit. I think what Prop 123 that the governor is proposing is very similar to what Doug Ducey proposed, was to change the formula of the state land trust to put more money into education. Did the Democrats support it at this time? And are the Republicans supporting a continuation of that plan or a renewal of that plan at this time?
Well, you're referring to the 2020 plan?
Yeah.
That happened at Red for Ed. And this is a different plan than that, because what happened was that was promised. And then because the overall needs of the school districts were not met, that money came to the school districts, and each school district had to decide, well, do we have air conditioning this year and not give everyone the raise that they were promised, or do we give every teacher a 20% raise and still not have air conditioning? So districts had to make really hard choices, which resulted in most of us not getting what Doug Ducey had promised us. So this plan will be much more of a real plan and real dollars to get those salaries raised and those hourlies raised. And the Republicans do not support our plan at all. They have their own plan, and that's for just teachers, and only some. You have to have a certain amount of students in your classroom, have to be a certain type of teacher, so not counselors, not school psychologists. And it's not as much money because they don't raise the interest rate up to 8.9%.
I guess I'm a little confused because you said it's Prop 123. So are we going to be, is it the plan to pass it through the legislature and put it on the ballot by referenda, or are we collecting signatures and putting it on as a citizens initiative?
Right now, it would be a legislative referral. So that currently is the plan to have the legislature refer it to the ballot in 2024, and it would be passed at the ballot. The
So we
Republicans
need some Republican support for that.
we would need some Republican support for that, absolutely. I'm not entirely confident that all of the Republicans are on board with the Republican plan. We are marching strong on the Democratic side, unified with our plan. The truth is, there's probably going to be some negotiation and compromise to come somewhere in between. We have a divided government. We're 31-29, and I realistically, I think that's where we'll land, somewhere between the Republican plan and the Democratic plan. Those talks are starting, I would say, and I think that the important thing to know is, from a values perspective, Democrats have two things in mind. One, include everybody, because as Whip Gutierrez said, everybody needs a raise. I was looking at the numbers just yesterday, and I was horrified to know that on average, education support professionals make less than $29,000 a year. I mean, that's not enough to survive for one person, let alone a family. And teacher pay, again, in Arizona is some of the lowest in the country. I myself was briefly a teacher. I was a 6th grade public school teacher. I taught English and social studies. I made less than $30,000. And that was one of the things that pushed me out of the profession. So we are advocating for all teachers and all educators and all education support professionals to be included in whatever plan is sent to the voters. The second thing we're calling for is, again, school safety measures, which is not in the Republican plan. And we're also wanting to do this in a way that keeps the state land trust healthy and sustainable over the long term. So those are the guiding principles we have as we head into the negotiations. The Republicans have put sort of their opening bid on the table. The Democrats, now we have our opening bid on the table. And in the coming months, I think we'll be negotiating something in the middle.
Yeah. So let me make sure I have a clear understanding, and by consequence, the viewers have a clear understanding of the differences in the budget position between the Democratic caucus and the governor and the Republican caucus. And that is that we would claw back a lot of the one-time spending from last year's bonanza of pork that they provided to each of their members. I think it was $30 million per member, whereas we put ours together and put it into actual state programs and state agencies. They oftentimes just directed it toward pork spending in their district. We're going to claw some of that back, a lot of that back, in order to backfill the deficit, and in order to further fund education. We're proposing this Prop 123 with a greater contribution to our schools from the state land trust. Does that pretty much sum it up?
Right on the money.
Right.
Yep.
I noticed that Joe Danishevsky, who is our Democrats Greater Tucson president, has arrived. I'm going to add him to the panel here since he has raised to ask a question.
Well, Nancy, Oscar, thank you so much for being with us tonight. And the Democrats Greater Tucson really appreciate all you do. And Mike, thanks for setting this up. My question, I think you both will have the numbers on this. But I'll tell you a little story first. I was at an event and I met a teacher, very nice individual, rather an administrator. She was the principal of a Catholic high school here in Tucson. So I kind of had some minutes before we were going to be speaking, and so I said, well, how can we do this? I mean, how can we be giving, money, to families and schools, private schools, my dad was a high school principal, vocational ed principal, and he sent all his kids to private schools, Catholic schools, but he did so believing in the real separation of church and state. And now tuition back then wasn't that much, but still, he paid for his 5 children to do it. So I asked the high school principal, I said, well, how do you think this is going to sustain? And she goes, oh, well, we're getting more money through the vouchers, but the public schools get so much more, per pupil. And I just looked at her like, are you really saying that? So what are the numbers? How much does a public school get per pupil?
That is such a good question, and it is an untruth. I'm looking for my exact numbers, but that it is an untruth that public schools get so much more than a voucher. The truth is that when a student takes an ESA voucher, that is, and they're coming from a private school, that is brand new money out of the general fund. It's a 100% new draw off of our general fund. On average, because there are different funding formulas for kids in Title I schools or not in Title I schools, but on average, a pupil spending is around $7,000. Charter schools get a little bit more than that. So public charter schools get, let's say, 8,000. These are round numbers because I can't find it right now, but
Okay.
I will get them to you. So vouchers get what the charter schools get. They get that amount and more. So when a child is coming from a charter school to a voucher, if they might be the same price. But if a child is coming from never had been in public school before, it's a brand new cost. We also have school districts in this state that, because their property taxes pay for the education, like Scottsdale School District, they don't take any of our general fund dollars to fund their education. So students in that district don't cost Arizona money out of our general fund until they take a voucher. So these are brand new costs. The statistics that the Republicans like to use are the federal dollars that come into our state, and that's how they're saying it's the 14th, public schools kids are $14,000. That's just simply not true. That's the money that pays for the actual school building, the lights. Well, these private schools have already been paying for that, right? And so they don't get that federal money. But what we're going to start seeing is more of these micro schools, which are currently in someone's garage with no oversight whatsoever. They're pulling in the $8,000 per student. And they're literally in their garage. Well, they're going to start building, or renting a building so they can get even more money. It is so dangerous because they're not the teachers are not certified, they're not fingerprinted, and the buildings themselves are never inspected. School buildings are inspected. We have maintenance people, we have maintenance records. So it's just not a fair comparison. And then when we talk about separation of church and state, private schools are allowed to teach any curriculum they want to. So, that for me, that is very scary. These micro schools, there is no oversight. You can have a micro school teaching just the most hideous, racist, homophobic curriculum, and that is just fine. And then we have kids that then will come to the public school after their parents figure out, oh, my child isn't learning. And now we have to catch them up 1, 2, 3 grade levels and be underfunded.
Yeah, and I understand that if they make that change from a private school or a home school to a public school, the money doesn't follow the student.
Not necessarily. If it's after the 100th day, and a student is added, that the public school is educating them for free, basically. That,
Wow.
you don't add a teacher after the 100th day of school. However, you might subtract teachers, if these kids are at their home schools and then decide to come, well, then now the class size is just bumped up to accommodate them.
Well, and I feel like you guys are in my living room and we're just having a super great conversation about these issues.
I get a little passionate, Joe. I'm sorry. I can't help it.
No,
We
you're
apologize
wonderful.
for that. No,
You,
education.
you don't have to say that to me, Nancy.
I know.
You're great. So, as far as things go, the other craziness is anybody can be teaching without any sort of a background check, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
it was the
Absolutely.
law written that way, or is it just?
Yeah.
Okay.
The law that governs these universal vouchers is that they are universal.
Yeah.
And there are some bills coming to ask for fingerprint clearance, to ask for, right now, honestly, someone teaching in one of these in one of these micro schools could be charged and even found guilty of a crime against kids, go to another one and be hired, because there is no centralized system. As a public school teacher, I have a fingerprint clearance that is statewide. And when I get hired in a school, they look me up to keep my teaching license, with the Board of Education. That has to remain clear. And that's just not true. And we've seen that. There have been some instances where someone was convicted, and the truth is they can go get hired in a number of facilities that take ESA vouchers.
Yeah.
And to put a fine point on it, our taxpayer dollars are paying for their salary. I mean, I hate to put it this way, but your taxpayer dollars, you watching right here, right now, could be paying for a child predator to be a quote unquote teacher in someone's garage. That is absolutely horrifying. And it is a misuse and abuse of taxpayer dollars, and it is putting our children at risk. So thank you for bringing that up, Joe.
Oh, you're welcome. You're very welcome. And again, thanks for all you do. I think the last question I had on this subject is charter schools. We lived in Southern California for about 9 years, and our youngest son had a very good experience with a Montessori high school. But I also had a chance to meet a friend, make a friend, who was on the school board, and that school board had tremendous oversight and pride of that charter school. But again, we don't have we
don't
ever
do
talked
that.
about that? Or I mean,
Well, yeah, some states charter schools are under the public school district. In Arizona, that's not how they work. However, they do have an oversight board, and they are, the Auditor General does, audit them occasionally. So there is oversight in charter schools. I think there's room for improvement. But overall, they have to put their curriculum on websites. They are much more accountable. They go under the A through F grading system that public schools do. So year after year, we've brought charter schools much more under the public school guidelines. Not enough personally for me, but certainly I think I could say fairly that charter and public schools are looking to these vouchers because they're hurting all of us.
well, when we flip, both houses, what's going to be your first educational priority?
There are so many. There are so many.
Much harm has been done.
I will tackle the ESA vouchers first.
Good.
I mean, that's just what is, it's not only detrimental to our schools, but it's detrimental to our entire state budget.
Well, I'm glad you're from LD 18, that's for sure.
Me too.
And I will add,
Santos, no, not at all.
what was that? Sorry.
Not to denigrate your district at all.
No, I'm telling you, I could not be more thrilled to be serving alongside Representative Gutierrez. It's a true honor. And once we tackle the ESA problem, we'll have a little bit more money in our coffers to invest in real public schools and with real teachers. And some of the things that we're going to be looking at are actually having a statewide full day kindergarten program.
100%.
That is high up on the list.
That's
Another
great.
huge thing that Democrats are eyeing and we are already working on is covering school meals for children. I mean, we are the wealthiest nation on the face of the planet. We should never, ever, ever have any child go hungry in our state. So we're going to be looking at making that investment, both because it's the right and moral thing to do, but also because you make it's an incredible return on investment. I mean, what child can learn if they're hungry, right? So it's going to be a tool to make a better education system and a better future for the state.
If I
Thank
recall
you,
correctly-
Assistant Leader, for pointing those out. They are definitely our priorities.
If I recall correctly, at one point we did have a pre-K system under a previous Democratic governor, but that quickly went away under a Republican governor. So if anybody remembers, back in the 90s, we actually had this wonderful facility for our youth, and we no longer do. So
Was that Janet Napolitano?
Yeah.
Napolitano?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. One of the things I'd like to turn to next is budget negotiations for next year. I mean, I've heard a lot of discontent from people like yourself in positions such as yourself, that there wasn't a lot of consultation between the governor's office and the Democratic caucus last time around in the negotiations. Can you talk about the frustrations that brought in the caucus and how you're planning on addressing this time around, and whether the governor is going to be, doing the same thing again?
Yeah, so I think we are already working closely with the governor's team. We started these budget talks with the governor's team in the summer, actually, and our members, both in the House and the Senate, have been meeting multiple times with the governor's most senior aides on the budget to share our priorities, to listen to the governor's team. And we do have a commitment from the governor's office to work in a much more close fashion this session. And I think that's going to be all the more important because we don't have, a surplus that we're going to be spending. We're going to be looking at how to make how to make up a deficit. So it's going to be incredibly important that Democrats are holding strong and are united when we go into these negotiations. And I don't want to give away too much because these negotiations are ongoing, but even today those talks were happening between our members and the governor's office. So I'm optimistic about the way that we're working with the ninth floor.
Yes, I agree. Much different process this session.
Excellent. That's good to hear. I definitely like to have our caucus involved in those negotiations. One of the big issues coming up for an election year around the conduct of our elections is there's a lot of concern about us not being able to certify our elections before the deadline because of some of the changes that were made to election law in recent years, specifically around recount thresholds. Could you all address that and talk about the prospects of fixing that in the current session or possibly a special session?
Sure. Yeah. I certainly. So just for context, a couple of years ago, the Republicans were in a frenzy of conspiracy theories, wanted to have many, many more recounts. And so they lowered the threshold to be able to have a recount. And so now it's just more likely we're going to have many, many more recounts. That is going to slow down the process for certifying the election. And the worst case sort of doomsday scenario is that we have so many recounts in the state that we don't meet the federal deadline to get our presidential electors counted. So if we don't fix this issue, worst case scenario, Arizonans could literally be disenfranchised and their votes will not count in the United States presidential election. It has never happened in the history of the United States of America. So that is what we need to avoid. It is an incredibly grave problem to have, a crisis of democracy if we get to that point. Luckily, we are working very closely with our county officials, the Secretary of State's office, and voting rights advocates to find a fix to the problem. And we have that fix, and it involves a couple of technical changes, and they're a little bit too boring to get into, but you shift some deadlines here, some deadlines there, and you make up enough time to ensure that the voters will be heard and that our votes will be counted. Now, you may be wondering, what's the problem? 3 letters, GOP. The Republicans are holding this hostage because they want to pass some sort of conspiracy theory legislation to restrict the right to vote. So what the Republicans are literally doing is they're telling Democrats, fine, if you want Arizonans' votes to matter, you need to pass these conspiracy theory type bills. And some of the legislation that they want included as a part of this package is making it harder for voters to drop off their ballots. You get your mail-in ballot at home. They don't want you to be able to drop it off at the polls, shrinking the amount of time you have to return your ballot, those kinds of things. I mean, they literally want fewer voters participating in the election, and they're using what should be a non-partisan, non-controversial technical fix that should go through with 100% support in the House and the Senate. I mean, it's a non-issue. We do these kinds of technical changes actually all the time. You'd be surprised how often you have 60 votes, all Democrats, all Republicans in the House, and 30, all Republicans, all Democrats in the Senate, and you sign it, and these are technical fixes. It should be one of those bills. They're holding this hostage because the most extreme members they have just are so gung-ho about, these election conspiracy theories. So we're working hard to protect that, protect our elections, make sure that the vote is counted. But we will need to do that very quickly. We are running up against the clock to get that done. And I do predict that if it's going to get done, it's going to get done in a special session. And the reason it has to be done in a special session is because laws are enacted based on when the session ends. So we need the session in which that law is enacted to end immediately. We can't wait until the end of this session. It's going to be too late. So we're going to go into a special session, end that session that day, so the law can take effect much faster and we can avert crisis.
Mm-hmm. Well, you can also shorten the time horizon for effectuation of the bill by having a larger majority, correct? An emergency law.
An emergency clause, yes, but we will need both an emergency clause and a special session.
Gotcha. All right. So that's the reason why the special session may be important, is the ending date of the legislative sessions come earlier. Gotcha. All right. Is there anything that you guys feel is important for the Democratic caucus messaging that you really want to get out there, that you want people to know Democrats are working on this session?
I think it's important that folks know that in addition to public education and saving our democracy, we're also working to protect that housing trust fund money that that's what we pulled our money together for last session. And so we want to help Arizonans, stay housed. And that is a huge Democratic priority. And then also we are working very hard to protect our water. That has to be done. And our governor has said that, if we can't do it, she will. And I know Assistant Leader De Los Santos is on our NRU committee, and he can speak to that in much more detail. But I want folks to know that, our priorities are Arizona priorities. We know that, and they know that. And in order to get them accomplished, we need them to vote. Voting this election in 24 is going to be the most important votes we ever have.
I'm just going to echo that message. We are ready to go. We are ready to govern. but we can't do it unless we have the majority. And we are so close to winning control in the House and the Senate. And, you know, Chris Mays won by just 280 some votes
Landslide
in a
May.
statewide
Landslide
election.
Mays, exactly.
Landslide Mays. Shout out to the Attorney General, by the way,
Yes.
who's doing a terrific job. But it shows you that in a statewide election, it came down to 280 people in the entire state of Arizona. And in our battleground districts here, the margins are going to be just as thin. So please get out there, vote, get your family and friends to vote, knock on doors, make phone calls, text bank, make a donation if you can. Every dollar matters, every phone call matters, every text message matters. You don't want to wake up the morning after election day and see that we lost an election by 10 votes and that we could have the majority, and that, you know, Representative Gutierrez's bills could be flying through our education committee. You know, the whether or not we have universal pre-K, whether or not we have access to abortion, whether or not we have a democracy, literally depends on you, on us, working our tails off between now and November. So please, please, please get involved.
Well, I to that end, I want people to know what legislative districts we are actually looking at that could potentially flip from red to blue this year. Can you give us a rundown of those districts that we're targeting in order to, you know, make sure that people are aware that, you know, maybe their district is one of them?
Well, definitely in Southern Arizona, it's LD 17, which is Oro Valley and then Tanque Verde. That is a crucial race. And then one that also is part of Pima County and Yuma County, and even a little bit of Maricopa County, is LD 23. That is a crucial race. We need both of those seats. And we have to keep all of our current members in. So LD 4, LD 2, LD 13, those, I mean, yeah, I'm very fortunate, and so as assistant leader, that we are both serve blue LDs, which is it's a gift of a lifetime, truly, and we both feel very honored to serve. But we are both working for all of the districts in Arizona, because we can't get there by ourselves. It's an effort for all of us to undertake.
Yeah, I know. Also, Keith Seaman is serving in
Yes, 16, absolutely.
16. Yeah, which is a slightly Republican-leaning district where he holds a single seat. We need to keep a hold of that. So yeah, I'd encourage viewers to go take a look at the Secretary of State's website, find out what LD you're in. If you're in one of those targeted LDs that's a very closely divided one, you know, take a really close look at your local elections. And for everybody who's watching, vote all the way down the ballot. I mean, if you're going to be voting for Democrats this year, especially in a presidential year where, of course, the highlight is, you know, President Biden and Kamala Harris, vote all the way down the ballot, all the way down Democrats, please.
Yes, please. Well, that's how we got into the superintendent of public instruction, is that people didn't do that. And now look at what happened when that.
Yeah. We actually had a question from one of our members, Karen Gleason, who wants to know about the new university access program that Tom Horn just introduced. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that's being paid for?
Well, they say it's free. You know, I haven't seen the numbers, but their message is this doesn't cost our public schools anything. But what I would say is the cost is way too high, because the cost is our kids, you know, ability to learn the truth of our history. This is a right-wing extremist university. I know I keep doing this, but I can't help it, because nothing that they say is true. It is right-wing extremists. It's some of their programs talk about how, you know, slavery was good for some slave. I mean,
Talk
just
about indoctrination of our children. Yeah.
It's indoctrination at its finest. It's disgusting. It honestly disgusts me. So the cost is our kids.
Well, I tell you what, you just saved me a little time, Nancy, because when I read that, Dennis Prager, uh, I knew I had to do more research, but now you filled
Is
me in.
that
So thank you very much.
it's as bad as it gets. I do want to just make sure that we do talk about reproductive rights, because
Absolutely.
that is
Yeah,
a
let's do that now.
huge priority for Democrats.
A headline here is that there will probably, we have not yet collected all the signatures, but we're considerably a long way there.
Yes.
The Arizona Abortion Access Initiative, which is a citizens initiative, which the citizens of Arizona are pooling together their resources in order to get that on the ballot in front of Arizona voters, where it has been on the ballot in every state that it's been in the ballot thus far, including deep red states like Kansas. It is passed overwhelmingly, and we are expecting that to definitely lift all Democratic votes and all pro-choice votes here in Arizona when people go to the polls in 24. Let's talk a little bit more about that proposition and what the Arizona legislature is doing to try and prevent further erosion of our rights.
Well, in the legislature, we have some bills that repeal the 1864 ban on abortion. We also have legislation that would protect people's privacy. A lot of information is gathered that I didn't realize when someone goes, for abortion care. A lot of their critical information is gathered and is not kept necessarily private. So there is legislation to make that extremely private. The problem is, will it be seen? Will it be heard in committee? We are working on that. I mean, it is a priority for all of us. I'll hand it over to Assistant Leader.
Yeah, the last bill I would talk about here is our Right to Contraception Act.
Yes.
That is incredibly important. We are seeing across the country far right, legislators and governors attacking contraception. I mean, this is beyond nonsensical and beyond dangerous. So it's sort of bizarre that we're even having to introduce language like that. But we are doing it. And so we introduced those three bills: the Privacy Act, the repeal of the territorial abortion ban, and the Right to Contraception Act as a package. And we were proud to do it alongside Governor Hobbs. So it just shows you we are working hand in hand with the Senate, with our colleagues in the Senate and with the governor's office on these critical issues. So, once, not if, but once we take the majority, those are going to be some of the highest priorities bills that we pass. And then of course, if you're watching, please make sure that you're helping gather signatures or that you sign it yourself. There's so many places you can sign the Arizona Abortion Access Act. We need hundreds of thousands of petition signatures to get on the ballot. We are almost there. We have a couple more months to get there, but we're going to need all the help we can get. It takes, 5 seconds to sign your name and write your address. But what I want to make sure that people know about is that we have to almost double the number of required signatures. And the reason why is because of the Arizona State Supreme Court. One of the things that people may not know is that Doug Ducey, in one of his, in 2016, I think it was, stacked the Arizona Supreme Court, and it was a 5-person body. He expanded the court to make it 7 people. Why did he do that? Because he saw the writing on the wall, and he knew that Democrats were inching toward power in the state, and he knew that he wanted a backstop. And that backstop was stacking the Supreme Court with Republican appointees. So what's going to happen is we're going to collect the signatures for the Abortion Access Act, and then some far-right fringe group is going to take us to court, is going to take the abortion access ballot to court and saying, actually, you need to disqualify, a bunch of signatures for a whole bunch of reasons. And the court is going to do it. They've kicked off ballot initiatives before. They kicked off in 2022 a measure that would have protected our democracy and our right to vote. They kicked it off the ballot. So we're going to need a ton of signatures to make it impossible for the Republican-packed court to kick us off the ballot. So please go sign.
Yeah, as an attorney, I can tell you that there has developed a very complex set of jurisprudence around ballot access that makes it increasingly difficult for citizens to access the ballot and to exercise their constitutional right to legislate. It's been severely burdened by this state Supreme Court in recent years. Are we expecting as long a session as we had last time around?
Well, I mean, hopefully not until July 31st, but we are expecting a lengthy session.
Yeah, that was
The
historically long. It was
Republicans,
the longest session, I believe, in Arizona history last time
yes,
around.
it
And a
was.
lot of it was completely unproductive. Just, nothing was being done. People were just collecting their per diems.
100%. This year, though, we do have the budget will be there will be no bills after the budget, like last session. So the budget will be the very last thing we do, and then we will sine die. But the Republicans say they want a budget right now. It's their budget. So we said, no, thank you. We would rather stay and work on it and provide for the people of Arizona. But we are expecting to go June-ish.
Yeah. Well, this doesn't directly impact on the work of the legislature, especially the Democratic caucus. But I was wondering if you have any insight or views on the current stalemate between the governor and the GOP caucus regarding her appointees getting confirmed.
I think she's gonna just make it work right now. I mean, it's a miscarriage of their power. These directors should have been in last session right away, and that's how it's always been. And they are extremely competent people. So now the workaround assistant leader, what's the title? Deputy executive director. Yeah. So they're deputy executive directors, and that's how she's worked around it. And we're still acting like the adults in the room and getting the job done.
Yeah. In terms of the scale of the obstreperousness and obstruction that they've been up to, do we have like a count of the number of nominees she put up versus the number that were actually confirmed?
Not off the top of my head.
No, either, but I think only a couple have been fully confirmed.
Yeah, it was 20 some nominees and a relative handful, like half a dozen,
Yeah.
actually been confirmed. So yeah, the Republicans have tried to stymie the work of the governor's office, the governor's administration, as a result of policy disagreements. Essentially, there was nothing wrong with any of these candidates.
Yeah.
But until they basically signed pledges to do the work of the Republican caucus for them, they weren't going to confirm anybody. So now the governor has basically made interim appointments, which she's allowed to do under the Arizona Constitution. She has that right enumerated in the Constitution to make interim appointments without confirmation by the Senate, and that's what she's doing, and she's being sued over it, of course.
Of course. Of course. I know that assistant leader is as honored as I am to serve, and to be freshman in leadership isn't even it's weighty, and I know for me this entire job is just an honor and a privilege, and we take it very seriously, and want to be there for the people of Arizona. So thank you for having us and for continuing to support me, especially because I know y'all and you're amazing, and just thank you for the work on educating Arizonans so that we know who is out there, we know who are the bad actors and who are the good actors, and who are the people that are going to guide our state into the future and protect us.
Thank you so much for having me on. I this is the first time I actually talked to a Tucson group, I think. So very, very honored to be here.
Well, though Tucson is in our name, we do fancy ourselves somewhat of a statewide organization now that, basically anybody can join from anywhere. You're in Phoenix right now and you didn't have to travel down here. So, it's a great opportunity and a great privilege for us to be able to provide insight into Arizona's politics through our elected officials. And so I want to really appreciate, you joining us. And it was great to meet you for the first time, Mr. De Los Santos. It was a pleasure. And I want to thank you for your time and coming and sharing your views and the caucus's priorities with us today. So Thank you for being here, and good night, everybody.